move on to our final book, and obviously it's a 96-page book with a bunch of creative. So what we're going to do for the review is we're going to review each individual story, at least our best to our recollection, because Alex, I believe you read the book Thursday, and I started reading the book Thursday, but I finished today.
I won't remember anything until you tell me about it, except the very end, which I wasn't happy about.
Okay, the first story, Batman's Longest Case, writer Scott Snyder, art by Greg Capullo. This is
a cute story. I remember this.
The one with the Secret Society.
Batman had been following one case all over the world for a decade, years, and he finally solves this case. And he follows it to a house, and there's a hidden door behind a bookshelf in the house. It's the last puzzle. And he walks in, and he finds Hawkman, Hawkgirl, Martian Manhunter, Detective Chimp, The Question, and somebody else who welcomes him to.
I thought with your knowledge of DC lore, you would have known.
I was unaware of this group. They all are like Hawkman and Hawkgirl are cops. Martian Manhunter is obviously a detective. Detective Chimp is called Detective Chimp. The Question is a searcher of truths. They are all detectives in their way. And it turns out this was all a incredibly long test to get Batman to find his way here. And
they were pledging Batman.
Yeah, they had a huge library which has over here are the mystical mysteries, like the things involved in magic. And here are all the unsolved crimes, ever. And this is, just all these things involved. And Batman thinks this is ridiculous, and then he opens a book and he's like, whoa. And then the issue ended, or the story ended. It was cute, but it's kind of ridiculous that they would go to those lengths just to get, they've been waiting 10 years for Batman to show
the best one, he was happy to show off, Detective Chimp. He leaves one of the clues in an icicle.
Yeah, and he's like, hey, Batman, I'm the one who came up with that. That was pretty good, right? He gets a pat on the back. Fucking monkey. So yeah, that was a fun story to open with.
Okay, the next one. Manufacturer for Use, writer Kevin Smith, art by Jim Lee.
I hated the art in this, by the way. I have no patience for Jim Lee anymore.
I thought the story was cute for what it was.
Is this the one where they took a picture of the Bat family?
No, this is the one where Batman finds the gun that murdered his parents, and he melts. He melts it down.
Yeah, he dresses up as Matches Malone and buys the gun that murdered his parents from a guy who he apparently collects leftovers of famous crimes in Gotham, and he buys it from him. And then, he's got it in a case, and Alfred's like, isn't this a bit much? You're keeping the gun.
He's like, I know
he even brings up, he's like, the penny and the dinosaur, that's one thing, but the gun that murdered your parents.
He's like, I know you're Batman, you're dark and all, but that's a little dark even for you.
Yeah, but he burned the gun down, and he made it into his chest plate that goes behind the bat symbol on the bat suit, because this thing that caused him to become Batman, the symbol of injustice, would now be used to get justice.
To protect his heart.
Which was, for Kevin Smith, it was a fairly simple, kind of nice little story.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't try to get overly clever with it.
No, unlike some people in this anthology.
And he also, since he only had to write one story, he actually finished it, unlike everything else he does. Daredevil Target. I'm still waiting.
Legend of Nut Brody, writer Paul Dini, art by Dustin Nguyen.
I like this one too.
I didn't like it.
This is about a famous henchman. They were doing Gotham News was doing a a focus on Nut Brody, who is the worst henchman. He has worked for every super criminal in Gotham, and every one of them, he's fucked up their plans. Every single one of them. And they apparently interviewed all the villains about how he fucked up their plans. They never explained how he kept getting hired.
Well, they mentioned in several instances where these villains were hard up for money, or I think the one with Joker where he was hired as to help out a politician at the last minute, so he had to make a team real quick, and Nut Brody was the easiest one to get a hold of.
Yeah, so, but he kept ruining all their plans, and we eventually find out Nut Brody was a character created by Batman and has been played by every member of the Bat family. But now that this documentary is run, clearly we can't use him anymore. But Damian is very upset because he's never been able to be Nut Brody. So he made his own costume, and he wants to be Nut Brody Jr. And that was the joke. It was cute and it was funny.
I guess. Return to Crime Alley, writer Denny O'Neil, art by Stephen Epting. Do you remember this one?
Oh, is this one with the old lady who helped raise him?
Yeah, and she shamed Batman.
So, and this was a very short story. Some of these stories were like 4 pages. So she's talking to Batman about like, listen, I know what happened to you, but you're basically doing violence. You could be doing charity and being which the irony is he does, but he also beats shit out of criminals. So while he's doing this, these kids who were wearing masks and stole a gun from somewhere, of course, since they have a gun, they go hold up the old lady standing with Batman, thinking, he's just a guy in a Batman costume. And he tells them, like, just fucking go away. And the kid pulls a gun on him. So he fucking backhands this little kid. And then he starts beating the shit out of all the kids. And she, like, screams no. And it's like, oh, poor thing. And the big line at the end was, he's like, well, you feel sorry for him. But she's like, no, I feel sorry for you. And it's like, really? This fucking kid's pulled a gun on you. Like,
well, to be fair, he just needed to disarm the kid. He'd have to pummel him and all of his friends.
Yeah, but it was.
You know what I mean? There's one. It's one thing to just stop the crime, and it's another thing to commit an act of vengeance and beat them up to a bloody pulp.
He did beat them kind of badly.
So that could be her point.
Yeah.
Right, so moving to the next story. Heretic by Christopher Priest, art by Neal Adams.
This was the one. This one was about they find a dead body, and he determines it's a member of the League of Assassins who was murdered and had a
Who attempted to leave?
Right, he tried to leave the League of Assassins, but he had a Thomas Wayne Foundation card on him. So Batman goes and tries to find out about it, and he meets with Ra's al Ghul in a car. Like, for some reason, Ra's is just hanging out in a car, and Batman, meets up with him and talks to him about it. And then he goes to bed. I don't know where the League of Assassins is. Snowy mountain place where Asians live.
So presumably to bed. This story had a good idea, but it just went on for too long.
But it also left on like a cliffhanger, which I thought was weird. Unless Christopher Priest is going to be writing Batman.
I wouldn't be against that.
Yeah. So, the next story I actually remember because it was the Bendis story, and I didn't dislike it.
Oh, yeah, I Know by Brian Michael Bendis and art by Alex Maley.
So it has old Bruce Wayne, pretty much Batman beyond Bruce Wayne, like he's in a wheelchair, and old Penguin goes to see him.
Danny DeVito looking Penguin.
Yeah.
It wasn't subtle. It was like, wow, that's straight up Danny DeVito.
He tells him, you know, I've known who Batman is for years, and Alex Maleev did the art in this, and I like him, so I thought that was cool. So he told the story about how all the villains would get together, and one time they were discussing, like, you know, Joker brought everyone together. We got to find out who Batman is. Like, he's got a kid, Robin. He's got to go to school somewhere. We got to find something that goes through it. And they're guessing who could it be? Well, maybe it's Lex Luthor, and somebody's like, well, maybe it's Bruce Wayne because Batman has to have a lot of money. And Penguin looks into it, and he finds out his whole history, and eventually comes to realize that Bruce Wayne is Batman. But they're telling stories about, like, times like, well, I held Bruce Wayne hostage, but Batman showed up to save him, so it can't be him. And he said he was going to announce to everyone that Bruce Wayne was Batman.
But basically, he chickened out, and he basically said, "Well, I didn't want to expose you.
Well,
so I don't want to."
Yeah, because he said if he did this, he would destroy Bruce Wayne, but not Batman. And if there was a Batman without Bruce Wayne, it would be the most terrifying thing ever. So he let him live. And then he kind of brags about it. He's like, I fucking knew who you were. I could have killed you, but I didn't know it. And before you died, because you're an old crippled man, I just wanted you to know that I knew. And then Batman shoots electricity out of his chair and electrocutes Penguin.
Basically, he confronted him. He's like, I knew that you knew, but I also knew you were a big enough coward that you would never do anything about it.
Yeah, so in his big final moment of victory, he gets completely shot down. And he's like screaming as they're tracking him away. He's like, they told me you couldn't talk anymore, which goes along with the cowardly thing. Like, he expected to be able to say this with no comeback, but he didn't even get that. So that was fun. And then the next story was a Jeff Johns story where he's basically just jerking off.
Yeah, The Last Crime in Gotham, obviously Jeff Johns and art by Kelly Jones.
Yeah, and it was a story about, like, older Batman and him and Catwoman's kids and grown-up Damian, who still had a Robin suit.
Poor Damian.
But he was just grown up, and Ace the Bat Hound was there. And it was, there was a birthday party with all kinds of villains, and they were all dead. And they kept trying to figure out who did it. And they're like, well, maybe it was Calendar Man, because it's a birthday theme. They're like, no, because Calendar Man's one of the dead people. And he's like, well, maybe it was Joker. And he's like, no, it's not Joker, because Joker died last night. And maybe it was Joker's kid, who is also dead. But
I believe that's who it was, Joker Jr., right?
Yeah, he did it, but he also killed himself because he said the chemicals that turned his dad into Joker gave him cancer and eventually killed him. But the same chemicals made him look like Joker, so he was also dying, but he wanted to take people out also.
Yeah, I much care for the story.
So it was what it was.
It's one of the weaker ones. But you think it'd be a little better with Jeff Johns?
Not necessarily.
Action Detective Comics 1000. The President by James Tylan IV, art by Alvarado Martinez.
And this was a Robin story. It was
specifically Dick Grayson.
Yeah, it was Alfred and, well, the most important Robin. It was Alfred and Bruce talking about all the things that even though Robin was, brought up as, Robin, he still, you know, he had friends, he had a girlfriend, he had a happier childhood. And Batman's kind of arguing with Alfred, and he's like, but the city is so dark and terrible. But he's just pointing out he's not, you know, Nightwing isn't you.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he's basically telling him, like, you were a good dad.
Yeah, he had a very similar origin story. He basically became like Batman, but personality wise, he grew up A-okay.
Yeah, which was a nice story. Like it made you not feel bad for Batman for once.
Mm-hmm. He done something right. You could argue his one-man war on crime has been fruitful or not, but if anything, you could argue he did a good job raising Dick.
Yeah.
Because if there's anything that we know about, if there's anything that Batman knows is Dick.
The next story was the Tom King story.
Yes, Batman's Greatest Case by Tom King, art by Tony S. Daniels. And
so Tom King doesn't really use the Bat family because they're more sectioned in Detective Comics. So this was his chance to, like, I'm going to write fucking Red Hood, I'm going to write Nightwing, I'm going to write Damian. Because some of them have been in his book, but they're not at all the focus. And I just want to say he fucking nailed every single character in the little he did. Because Tom King is better than everyone else. He even had the yellow one, whose name I keep forgetting.
Duke. It's not hard, dude.
Oh, whatever. I'm not going to remember that because I never see him in a book. Spoiler is, but this is a small thing, Spoiler is alive. And I had no idea. I thought she's still dead and is apparently still dating Tim.
Is that who she was dating?
Yeah, because she's talking to Tim.
Okay, you made it sound like a question. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's who it was.
No, I was just shocked that she's still alive because she's supposed to be dead.
Well, there's Detective Comics and we never read it. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other Batman books that we haven't read.
So they were, well, literally everyone who was involved in the Bat family was there, and they have some pretty funny, it's basically just them all talking to each other. And it was funny, it was entertaining to read. And then in the end, Batman finally shows up, and he takes a group photo of them. And then he puts the group photo, you know, they're all in costume. He puts it on his parents' grave,
mm-hmm.
To show, you know, there's still a family, mm-hmm. And that means that, you know, losing my parents doesn't mean I don't have a family. I have a family. Here it is. We're all wearing ridiculous costumes, but we're still a family. We're a fairly large family. It was a very Tom King sort of sweet story. And then they had a collection of covers, and then they did. Yeah,
I thought that was the end of the book. I was like, oh wait, because I think that's where I tapped out. I was like, okay,
it went on. No, because the next one was narration by a character discussing Batman. And you scroll and it's spread pages. It's, you know, there's a page of Batman fighting Joker. There's a page of Batman fighting Croc with this stuff over it. And you're scrolling through and you're like, okay, what the fuck is this? Because it's not Batman talking. Who is it? But this person doesn't approve of Batman's ways. And you go through it, and you go through it, and you go through it, and you get to the end, and there's this ridiculous looking character with a big fucking sword. And I say, who the fuck is that? And he says, and they will bear witness to the Arkham Knight finally delivering justice to Batman. And I go, that's a stupid fucking character design. What is this? So I go look it up because I don't recognize the character. And Tomasi did it, and I like Tomasi.
Well, look at the very bottom of the page. To be continued in Detective Comics 1001.
Yeah, so I look it up. The Arkham Knight is a character created for the video game,
Yes.
which was probably created by a comic writer.
It was. You know why? Because it was basically the Red Hood storyline.
So I assume this will be different then, since we've
It
read
has to be, because we already have a Red Hood. We already have Jason Todd.
Oh, Arkham Knight was Jason Todd, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Okay. So he can't be Jason Todd.
Hopefully not.
Is he fucking, do we have, Jean-Paul? Batman 2? Do we have him? Because Batman 2 didn't approve of Batman's ways because he wasn't a creepy religious cultist.
Well, and, because his rebirth, they very well could bring that back.
I liked the Azrael costume.
Yeah, it was good.
He looked like a cross between Batman and Spawn.
It was of its time. I'll leave it at that.
I thought it was cool when I was a kid.
Yeah, when you were a kid in the early 90s, yes, it was cool.
Yes, it was cool. If
you were a kid in the early 90s, I'm sure it was a cool costume.
My favorite is some of the people who drew him like his costume was made out of really sharp triangles.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess that's how you draw capes.
Very pointy.
So they look really pointy. Like if you touch any part of his fucking cape, you will get cut. Bitch.
This felt like unfortunately, I have to compare this to Action Comics 1000. The story quality was consistent. It did dip a little as far as some stories were better than others. Whereas the Action Comics, some of the stories were appalling and then some of them were pretty good. This was pretty consistent. But I guess they realized the strength of the Batman character, because this did read a lot longer. Took a lot more time to read. But at the same time, I felt like the lineup was a lot better too. As far as you look at the names, and a couple of them you kind of question, but for the most part, they're for the most part heavy hitters.
I gotta say, I did like the selection of writers, and all the stories were different, but I felt there was a lot on like Batman as a family man. They did a lot with the Bat family, and I thought that was a little odd. Like, there wasn't a story in this about Batman being a loner. There wasn't really a story about, a Batman villain. I mean, there's the Penguin thing.
Yeah, but there wasn't specifically
out.
One, and you expected if it was a big Action Comics 1000, there would be a Joker story in here.
Yeah, if you're doing a overview, this is Detective Comics 1000. This is the comic Batman. This is the comic DC Comics is named after, but it's the comic Batman debuted in. I would have liked a more a better overview of Batman as a character. And I don't think I really got it. I got some really good Batman stories. And, I mean, Batman was never presented incorrectly, I'd say, in any of the stories.
I wonder how they came about approaching these writers. Did they say, okay, we're doing Action Comics 1000, you can have a story? Or did they specifically tell them, okay, you're writing Action Comics 1000, we want you to write this kind of story, because we want the 1000 issue to be sort of like in every aspect of Batman?
They were all name writers. I think they just went to them and said, will you contribute a story to this? And they probably just all said, yeah. I don't think they told them what to write. Maybe the Arkham Knight thing. Like,
well, that's his book.
He's the guy who writes the comics. So.
Yeah, just like remember when Bendis had a storyline in Action Comics 1000 that led to the next issue?
I have a really good question. Grant Morrison is working for DC. Grant Morrison wrote Batman for like 100 issues. Grant Morrison is one of the two writers whose stories weren't impacted by New 52. Why did he not have a story in this?
I presume Grant Morrison is at the point of his career where he can just do whatever he wants.
He's like, I wrote my Batman story, I'm done.
Well, it also could be they couldn't afford him.
I don't think it's they couldn't afford him, because Grant Morrison is still a huge comics fan.
No, I'm saying Grant Morrison could be in the scenario where, he feels like he's worth X.
Does he cost more than Bendis?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think they paid more for Bendis than they did for Grant Morrison.
Okay, because the thing could be, he would like to write a story, but then he would establish a precedent of, well, you wrote that story for cheaper than you're going, right? Well,
yeah, but they understand it was a special circumstance.
And like you mentioned earlier, there were some stories that kind of rewarded you for reading Batman for all these years, but a lot of these stories felt like, well, this book isn't 100% for people that have been reading Detective Comics all this time. We realize a lot of people are going to buy this who haven't read a Batman book in forever, or have never read a Batman book.
Do a bunch of Batman stories anyone can understand.
Yeah, exactly.
I would have liked a short story about the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh. Or maybe Batmite.
Oh, I was about to say Batmite.
Yeah, because Morrison used Batmite.
Or the Batman, the one with the clever quilt.
I'm Crazy Quilt. I'm gonna reread his entire run. It was fantastic.
Because we don't read enough comic books, right?
No, I'm not gonna do it for the show. I'm gonna do it for my own enjoyment.
Okay, there you go. All right, that's gonna do it for this week's books. Let's move on to our final segment, next week's books, and I'm gonna save again.